Welcome to the Agency Uplift podcast, where we go past the highlight reel and dig into what actually builds a strong agency. Clear foundations, better decisions, and the courage to scale on purpose. I'm your host, Sean Lang, co-founder of Social Commerce Club and advisor to agency owners. And today is a solo episode. I'm going to be talking about a really, really difficult experience early on in my agency where we had dream results for a client and they still fired us. So the headline for this should be, we had a client and we're achieving a return on ad spend of over 18 for a solid 6 months straight. It never dipped below that. It only went above that. And they still fired us. We were absolutely in shock. This client was wildly profitable. They had insanely high growth. We were responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue, and yet they still left. Maybe you've been in a similar experience or a similar situation, and it is unfortunately too common in the agency space. And so we're going to dig into how this happened. So let me just set the stage for you. So this was before COVID, and this was before the ominous, what am I trying to say? This is before, guys, words are escaping me. I need coffee. This is before the infamous iOS 14 updates. So before that, we actually had access to so much more data as advertisers, and it was much easier to print money. And so we were benefiting from the additional data, and the results were insane. Now, this was a kids clothing brand. So this is a DTC brand, and they had been with us for a total of 6 months before they left us. And our mantra behind closed doors was, this client is never going to leave. They must be so pumped. And nothing could have been farther from the truth. So we were obviously super, super confused when this happened. We were very frustrated. We didn't quite believe it. And this is because we thought incorrectly, like a lot of you do, that results would be the glue that keeps the relationship together. And this actually isn't true. Results are table stakes. Results are the bare minimum. As an agency, they're paying to bring experts in like you to create results. That is not enough. So first off, doing a postmortem and knowing what I know now and having, these frameworks built out with the agency uplift methodology is the relationship did not start off on the right foot. We actually didn't have an official and properly defined client onboarding process back then. We didn't have a sales to service handoff. There was no roadmap itemizing what was going to happen and when it was going to happen and why it was going to happen. So we actually missed that opportunity to create those trust deposits, those deposits into the emotional bank account of the client that are so critical early on. We missed the chance to show them exactly what it would look like when we worked together. And so this is something that's very, very key. You need to have a plan for client experience, which will define your plan for onboarding, which will maximize your retention from day one. We did not have that. And this actually violates one of my core values. One of my core values is ruthless clarity, and we left this open. It was ambiguous. We left the expectations and the process undefined. So another thing that we screwed up, and again, this is really early days. This is past version. I'm totally fine to admit all of this. Another thing that we screwed up is we didn't have a regular cadence for client meetings. We kind of left that up to the client. We let them know what we were doing. And by what we were doing, I mean, we would just send them, Facebook ad reports and would tell them like, ROAS is good, things are going well. But at the end of the day, what I think ended up happening was the clients felt that the results were a direct result of luck rather than us leading the account. And we were actually doing a lot of work in the account, but the client wasn't understanding what we were doing because we didn't have a defined cadence. We didn't have a defined type of report that we were sending them. We weren't walking them through and educating them on the process of what was happening, why it was happening, and what that was leading to. So again, this comes back to client experience. We didn't have client experience built. And so we just left that up to the whim of however the client was feeling and however we were feeling. And it was a huge miss on our part. Another huge miss on our side was we didn't have a tightly defined scope of work. They hired us for marketing. to grow their D2C brand, and that's what we did. But we didn't actually define what that meant. Again, in violation of one of my core values, ruthless clarity, we allowed ambiguity to take the place of a detailed scope, which in the early days probably made us uncomfortable. We weren't really sure what that looked like, and we were too unconfident in our abilities to actually say, this is what we're going to do, and here is what it's worth. We left it open-ended. And at the start, it worked, but at the end, as you see, as we've already talked about, it did not work. Without SOPs, without scope clarity, the client couldn't actually measure what we were actually delivering. Again, we were just reporting results at the end of the day. Look how good things are on Facebook, right? And another value that we violated here of mine was fix the foundation first. We scaled a relationship, but without any sort of structural clarity. We didn't start from the ground up. We skipped it. And then another thing that we screwed up is there was little clarity on what we were doing. The results were visible, but the process was invisible. The clients didn't see the strategy. They didn't see all of the testing cycles or the decision logic that was behind the ads we were running. And so at the end of the day, again, this goes back to ambiguity. There was no clarity. And also, one of my core values is tell the truth, even when it hurts. So we didn't actually let them know what we were doing, what was working, what wasn't, the things that we were seeing that wasn't adding dollars to the bottom line versus the things that were. We were just showing the good, and that was it. And it's important when you want to build trust with a client to show them everything. Obviously, you want to lead that relationship, and you want to guide them, and you want to make sure that they have a correct understanding of what it means, but it needs to be open and it needs to be transparent. And this relationship had none of that. So from a high level, we skipped foundations. There was no onboarding. There were no SOPs in the agency for client communications. We didn't have any core values at this point. We didn't have processes for client experience. The positioning of what our role was really poor. We just let the numbers speak for themselves, but we didn't actually anchor them in strategy. There was no positioning. And there was a lack of this be the CEO mindset that is really important for agencies. We just acted like operators, just delivering ads, not like strategic partners that are leading growth with the client. So some really hard lessons that we learned are that results without relationship means a fragile relationship and, fragile retention at the end of the day. Another one is onboarding is not a formality. It is going to be the foundation of trust, and nailing onboarding is probably one of the most important things you can do in the client relationship. Aside from the work that you deliver afterwards, the onboarding is going to allow you to do that. It's going to build that foundation that you can then build that relationship on top of. Another one is that scope clarity protects both the client relationship and also the perceived value. A lot of you, and I talk to a lot of agency owners, and a lot of you are hesitant to define scope. This is really, really going to help you at the end of the day, because the client needs to know how they should be measuring you. And if you don't tell them how they should be measuring you, then they're just going to decide that for themselves. And it could be in your favor, and it also could not be. And then another learning was that regular strategic communication cements your role as the expert. It is very, very critical. So things that we changed after this is we built out a visual week by week onboarding roadmap. So before the client even makes the decision to sign, before there's even a contract to sign, we're walking the prospect at this point through, well, here's what week 1 looks like. Here's what week 2 looks like, and 3 and 4, as many weeks as it takes. And I'll give you guys a little nugget here. When this first started, it was 6 weeks. The actual onboarding was 6 weeks, and we eventually realized, we need to decrease that time to results, that time to action. And so then it went down to 4 weeks, and then it went down to 4 weeks, but a 2-week action window at the start, because we want to make it as short as possible. And you want the client to see that and expect it. They get excited. The worst thing that you can do is get a client pumped up in the sales call, they sign, and then when you're onboarding them, you're explaining to them, oh, well, we're not really going to be doing anything for 6 to 8 weeks. Nothing kills a client relationship before you get started like doing that. So don't do that. Another thing we obviously did is we locked in weekly client strategy calls in the first meeting. And one thing that we noticed early on is that weekly is important to establish the relationship so that you build that rapport, that they build that trust in you. And then afterwards, you can decrease it to bi-weekly, because at the end of the day, if the client trusts you, they don't need to be asking you questions every single week. We all have the one or two clients here and there that they seem to have no end to the questions that they want to ask you, and that's obviously something to manage. But at the end of the day, starting weekly and then moving to biweekly is definitely a game changer. We also added SOPs for scope definition and for client updates. Here is what is included in a client update. Here is how you communicate it. Here is not how you communicate it. And then we also trained the team to make the invisible work visible, turning the delivery into an actual narrative. And we actually have this mantra that we said a lot in the early days when we were really trying to make this mindset shift, which is if it didn't get communicated, it didn't get done. In the marketing world, especially when we're specialists and we're so used to doing all of these things over and over again, it's like second nature. To the client, it's not. So to the client, you actually need to be repeating these things and saying these things that feel so mundane and so obvious to you. To the client, it's not. You need to actually speak it out. So in summary, this client leaving, it was really upsetting to us. It really hurt because we felt that this was going to be like the shining crown jewel case study for us. And then they left due to a poor relationship. How do you turn a poor relationship into a case study? It's not going to work. But it ended up being a gift because it actually exposed a lot of cracks in our kind of non-existent foundations before the market ultimately got tougher with COVID. And so now we keep clients not just because of the results, but because they trust us, they understand us, and they see us as partners. So this has been a little walkthrough of some stupid mistakes we made. It was very, very painful. And if you've been in the agency game for any longer than a couple of years, I'm sure that this resonated with you. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next episode.